Lillian D. Chloe. On Saturday, April 29, 1994, June Nicholas found her 89-year-old aunt, Lillian D. Chloe, dead on the bedroom floor of her yellow brick home at 1550 Northwest South Avenue in Pompano Beach, Florida. Nobody knew who had attacked, beaten, and strangled her during the day. Using forensic analysis and DNA evidence, this tragic story would lead investigators on an unexpected trip that would ultimately reveal a surprising fact that would be kept a secret for the next 28 years. June, along with the rest of Lillian's family, would be forever entangled in a web of grief and anguish due to the trivial question: who would want to cause harm to an innocent 89-year-old woman? Today's story takes us back 30 years to Lillian D. Chloe's horrific 1994 assassination. The story of today takes place in the quaint Broward County, Florida city of Pompano Beach. The city's beaches, which have soft golden sand and turquoise blue waters, got their name from a species of fish that was formerly common off their shore. Despite the high crime rate in the region, Lillian D. Chloe, then 89 years old, was nevertheless able to enjoy Pompano Beach in 1994 after a youth well spent. Lillian D. Chloe was born in 1905. Lillian dedicated her early years to helping people, especially via her employment as a nurse and teacher. Her neighbors, co-workers, patients, and pupils, among others, all loved her for her kindness, patience, and loving personality. Lillian's niece, June Nicholas, was one of the many people that loved her. When June, her siblings, and her cousins were younger, Lillian helped raise them. Lillian relocated to Pompano Beach, Florida, in order to have a peaceful final years. June took care of her as she grew older and started to suffer from ailments associated with aging-related cognitive loss. To everyone who knew her, 89-year-old Lillian D. Chloe was a bright example of a life well lived. Lillian retired to 1515 Northwest 7th Avenue, Pompano Beach, her yellow brick house. Several years of working as a teacher and nurse in her community. There, by alone, she led a very regular existence until violence crashed through her bedroom window and destroyed her tranquility. Saturday, April 29, 1994, was just like any other Saturday for Lillian D. Chloe. Dressed in her pink and white checkered nightgown, she looked forward to spending the evening with her niece June. June assumed the job of caregiver as Lillian became older, stopping over frequently to check on her and provide help with cleaning, medication reminders, or just to keep her company. June visited Lillian that fateful day at around 6 o'clock to check on her and to deliver some groceries that she had purchased for her. Upon entering the living area, she noticed that Lillian had disappeared. June then called out the aunt's name to see where she was, but she received no answer. June checked the first bedroom, Lillian's normal sleeping quarters, but she was not there. June looked inside the bedroom on the right after following the corridor. She looked a little surprised. There on the floor, seemingly dead, lay her Aunt Lillian. June sobbed and ran back up the corridor to call the police. 2 Pompano Beach Police Department officers responded to June's 911 call, their heads aflutter with inquiries. It was not common to hear of an 89-year-old woman being murdered in her own house, so it seemed like a strange call. The officers were able to verify Lillian's death when they arrived at 1550 Northwest 7th Avenue. Lillian was discovered unconscious on the ground, adjacent to a toppled floor lamp and a phone with its cord severed. She appeared to have been battered because of the cuts and bruises all over her body. The room was littered with blood-stained towels and various articles of apparel. The officers also noticed a shattered window in the room where Lillian's body was found, which is most likely where Lillian's attackers had entered. The house had been looted. The numerous broken pieces of furniture strewn all over the room indicated that Lillian had engaged in a bloody struggle for her life. At first, it seemed like a crime of passion because of the horrific state of Lillian's body. Lillian's body was bruised all over. Her nose, ribs, and wrist were all fractured. Moreover, there were injuries around her genitalia, suggesting that she had been beaten before she passed away. The injuries on her neck indicated that she had also been strangled. The Broward Medical Examiner's Office concluded that Lillian died from asphyxiation and a strike to the head following her autopsy. Lillian's attackers used the phone, whose cable had been taken out, to strangle her. It was found near to her body. However, there was no indication that Lillian was the specific target of her attacker. Thus, it's likely that passion had nothing to do with the crime. Since Lillian was generally well-liked in her neighborhood, she had no adversaries. The general state of the residence and the crime scene, according to Pompano Beach Police Department Lieutenant Earl Fluellen, suggested that the case was likely one of a burglary gone wrong. But Lillian's family didn't understand it. They knew she'd lived alone and didn't have any fortune to justify losing her life. June recalled that Lillian had no more than $50 at the residence at the time of the occurrence. After the residence was searched, the only item that appeared missing was a gold wedding band. Around 6:50 a.m. that morning, Lillian went to buy a newspaper, which was the last time the neighbors saw her. However, following the collection of evidence from the crime scene, authorities interviewed them to find out if they had heard anything regarding Lillian's murder. She looked healthy that morning, even though the murder took place during the day, and no one could recall seeing anything strange. In a few days, detectives had gathered enough information on potential suspects in Lillian's murder to warrant an arrest, but not enough to make an arrest. With a $1,000 prize for information leading to Lillian's killer's identity, the police hoped to entice witnesses to try to remember anything they might have heard or seen that could help with the investigation. Pompano Beach Authorities spokeswoman Sandra King also told the reporters that the authorities were looking for anyone who had information about the crime or the man who perpetrated it. In an interview with The Sun, Sandra King said, "At this point, we're encouraging anyone who saw anything to call us, holding the blood of an 89-year-old helpless woman in their hands. There's a human creature running loose." But after the first several weeks of inquiry and optimistic developments, all leads quickly drained out, and the case went cold. June Nicholas, on the other hand, was grieving the loss of her beloved Aunt Lillian. Without her aunt, and without understanding what had transpired or who had injured her so badly, she found it extremely difficult to move on. June had to take a full year out of work due to the loss of her aunt. For several months, she was in too much pain to look after her kids, so she had to ask someone else to look after them while she grieved. She could not get rid of the image of Lillian laying on her living room floor, no matter how hard she tried. Worse, the lawsuit was dropped, eliminating any chance of discovering the real outcome of Lillian's whereabouts. For the ensuing 10 years, no fresh information on the Lillian DeCloe case was released from the case file, and it was forgotten. But by 1999, Pompano Beach was using the Broward Sheriff's Office for police enforcement. Part of this involved taking charge of each and every cold case in Pompano Beach. One of the cold cases that the Broward Sheriff's Office detectives reopened by 2004 was the 1994 murder of Lillian DeCloe. David Towsley, a detective with the Broward Sheriff's Office, oversaw the investigation. With the help of other detectives in the unit, they re-examined evidence recovered from the crime site almost 30 years earlier and combed through old case files and DNA databases. One piece of evidence that stood out particularly was the pink and white checkered nightgown that Lillian was wearing the day she was killed. When they sent the nightgown to the lab for more testing, they discovered that it contained the male attacker's bodily fluids. Perhaps the most crucial piece of evidence in solving the case was this knowledge. The authorities created a genetic profile using the fluid sample from the nightgown and placed it into the FBI's CODIS, or Combined DNA Database System, but they were unable to locate a match. Again, a promising lead had disappeared, and the case was dropped. Detective Towsley was determined to close the investigation in order to give Lillian DeCloe's family closure and the opportunity to go on. Despite the extra 15 years, Detective Towsley's persistence allowed him to re-examine the case in 2019 under the Broward Sheriff's Office's newly formed cold case team. Reopening the DeCloe case didn't seem to have any positive outcomes, according to Jennifer Parker, the criminalist from the Broward Sheriff's Office who oversaw the DNA examination of the case's evidence. But because to developments in DNA testing technology, Towsley believed he could identify the individual who had put their bodily material on Lillian's nightgown. The Broward County Crime Lab obtained a more complete DNA profile in 2021. Because of this fresh analysis of technology, Detective Towsley and his crew asked the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to use the DNA profile for a family search of its offender database. Stated differently, they cross-referenced the DNA profile with the database of people who had been taken into custody and recorded as criminals. This method compares the DNA profile to possible first-order relatives in the database, such as a father, sister, or kid. A match was discovered by the search. The DNA from the crime scene was strikingly identical to that of a known offender in the system. The man whose DNA was found on Lillian DeClose's clothes the day she was slain was identified as the offender. This man's name was Johnny Matt Brown. The murder of Lillian DeCloe occurred while Johnny Matt Brown was 40 years old. He was a 1954-born Vietnam War veteran who also suffered from PTSD. Life after the service was not enjoyable for Johnny. He started using drugs as a PTSD coping method, which eventually resulted in drug addiction. He battled for a while to obtain steady work because of his addiction and mental health issues. Johnny found himself homeless as well. Upon originally investigating Lillian's death, Johnny was not considered a suspect in this case or any other crime. He went entirely overlooked. However, it became increasingly obvious that Johnny was most likely the one who had attacked Lillian on that fatal day when the authorities were able to match Johnny's DNA profile. Police also found some important information. Even though Johnny and Lillian lived a short distance apart in the early 1990s and early 1994, Johnny had passed away by the time investigators were able to find him to question. In 2010, he died of natural causes at the age of 56. In Lake Worth, Florida, at the South Florida National Cemetery, Johnny was buried. A judge approved the Broward Sheriff's Office detective's request in August 2022 to exhume Johnny's remains for examination. The U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, the Palm Beach Medical Examiner's Office, and her forensic anthropologist, who excavated the bones and tested their DNA, all worked together with the investigators. The experts evaluated samples collected from Johnny's body in the Broward Sheriff's Office crime lab to get the most precise result possible. The office's criminal list supervisor, Jennifer Parker, compared the findings to the pre-existing DNA profile. Parker took a sample of Johnny's bone marrow from his ribs so that it could be examined. The sample found at the crime site and the known DNA profile matched, according to the test results. The DNA results showed that there was 66.8 trillion times greater likelihood that Johnny's DNA was from the crime scene than that of anyone else, according to the Broward Sheriff's Office. With this conclusive evidence, Johnny Mack Brown's guilt as Lillian DeClose's murderer was without dispute. That did not, however, fully explain Johnny's motivation. The prior conclusion that the whole episode was just a case of burglary gone wrong seemed to be the most likely explanation for what happened. In a press conference, Broward County Sheriff Gregory Toney said that it was most likely an opportunistic crime. The sheriff indicated that he only lived a few houses down from there. When he hit hard times, he became homeless and acquired a drug habit which led him to break into the house. Maybe he didn't realize she was alone in there. But she was 89. Because everything seemed to have been removed from the house and all of the drawers were open, it looked as though she was living alone. All of the evidence that the police had obtained up to this point was shown to the Broward State Attorney's Office. The prosecution there concluded that Johnny Mack Brown was involved in Lillian DeClose's killing after reviewing the evidence. The issue was settled. Justice may seem to linger for a long time, but Sheriff Toney believes that justice never ends. He went on, "We will keep pushing for the necessary manpower as long as we are responsible for investigating these cases in order to ensure that we can provide closure to the numerous families who have been waiting for decades, repeatedly, in the hopes that they receive some sort of resolution." For 28 years, Lillian DeClose's family longed for an explanation to the mysterious circumstances surrounding their loved one's passing. Now that they've finally found the answers they were searching for, they can move on. June Nicholas, who found Leon's cold body years earlier, thanks the Broward Sheriff's Office for their dedication and for finding out the truth about her aunt's death. She believes her aunt can finally sleep well at this point. She can sleep soundly wherever, I'm sure. We are free to proceed. We know her murder has been solved, so we can pass away in peace. By the time the novel concludes, we know for sure who killed Lillian DeClote, but some questions remain, questions from an unknown history that continue to bother us. What drove Johnny McBrown to do that particular action? Did he feel guilty about it in the years that followed? Was it taking too long for the detectives to find the real killer? Is it true that justice was served in this particular case? Please use the comment area to share your thoughts with us. Moving on to the next case. Marlene Warren. Marlene Warren had no idea that the clown outside her door bringing balloons and flowers was actually a murderer with a revolver concealed in his outfit. For more than 30 years, the killer clown case remained unsolved for investigators, Floridians, and fans of true crime across the globe. The date of Marlene Warren's birth is April 15, 1950. She married Michael Warren, who was 19 years old when she turned 22. Marlene had 2 children from her first marriage, and it seemed like Michael saw her 2 young lads as his own. Together, the couple developed as they put in a lot of effort and became well known. They acquired several businesses, one of which was Michael's used car dealership. The family's multiple sources of income allowed them to keep up a respectable standard of living. Their lives were so good that they could buy a 6,500 square foot home in the exclusive Aero Club suburb of Wellington, Florida. Every residence in this neighborhood has a runway and hangar of its own, allowing the homeowners to use their personal aircraft whenever they like. The Warrens gave the impression of having everything, yet this was not the case at all. In 1983, Michael ran into legal issues at his car dealership. After he was accused by customers of tampering with the odometer, he was taken into custody by the police. As a result, he was placed on probation for 18 months. It was well known by 1990 that the Warrens were having marital problems. One of Michael's employees, Sheila Keene, was supposedly involved in an affair with him. Sheila's husband chose to divorce her in spite of Sheila and Michael's denials of these claims. A white Chrysler LeBaron without a license plate drove down the block where Michael and Marlene lived on May 26, 1990. While in the kitchen with a friend, Marlene noticed someone dressed as a clown approaching the front door with a basket filled with balloons and flowers. Marlene was raised in a family that loved clowns. Her mother has an entire room full of collectible clowns because her family loved clowns so much. Marlene, who was 14 years old, had painted clowns. Marlene ran to the front door to greet her guest, much to the delight of clowns. Joseph Aarons, her son, who was present at the time, remembered hearing his mother say something like, "How pretty." This seemed to be Marlene's final remarks, since shortly after there was a pop sound that was heard by everyone in the home, including Joseph's visiting guests. They initially believed the noise to be the popping of a balloon. But then they saw Marlene fall to the floor. Everyone raced to the door, attentive now. The clown strolled back to the white Chrysler LeBaron, leaving the balloons and flowers behind. Joseph attempted to chase the clown, but his leg cast prevented him from going too far. But he did remember telling the clown to turn around with a loud voice. The clown pivoted and bestowed onto him a brown, wide-eyed glare. There was no expression on its face. Soon after, the clown got into the white LeBron and drove off. Witnesses only described Marlene's wounds as having been caused by a clown with brown eyes. They didn't even know the clown's gender. After attempting to pursue the clown in their own vehicle, Joseph and a friend lost sight of it. They hurried Marlene Warren to the hospital. She had been shot twice in the face at point-blank range, it was found. Despite her best efforts, she passed away in the hospital 2 days later. Michael Warren, who wasn't home when the event occurred, was checked in by detectives. Michael had a very good excuse. While traveling with companions to a racetrack in Miami, he received the devastating news. He returned home quickly to console the family. He cooperated with the investigation process by giving as much information as possible when questioned by the detectives. He was promptly excluded as a suspect. The authorities could not understand. In his 19 years as a law enforcement officer, a spokeswoman for the Palm Beach County Sheriff said that the killer clown case was the most bizarre thing he had ever seen. 2 hours following the homicide, police received a strong tip. A caller who desired to remain anonymous recommended that Sheila Keene and Michael Warren be interrogated in depth by the police. She hung up before the police could question her more. At the time of the murder, Michael was traveling with friends, but Sheila Keene was in town. Sheila worked as a repo person for Michael's dealership, despite her claims to have been at work. It wasn't exactly a strong alibi. A couple of days following the media attention surrounding Marlene Warren's murderous clown case, 2 staff members of the Spotlight, a local costume shop, told the authorities about an unusual encounter. They said that as they were ready to close up the business, one woman with cocoa brown hair approached them. She cried out to be let inside. She was told by the staff that they were closed and that she should return the next day. But she persisted, telling them that she actually required a costume for the evening. It was almost Labor Day weekend, so the request seemed odd given that it wasn't Halloween. Nevertheless, the 2 staff members were understanding and let her into the shop. It was alleged that she purchased an orange afro wig, white gloves, red nose, white makeup, and a clown costume. Later in the investigation, the 2 workers identified Sheila Keene from a picture lineup and said they were pretty sure it was Sheila who had shown up pleading for a clown outfit. The grocer that sold the balloons and flowers the clown had delivered to Marlene's home was the next place the police investigated. It was found that Sheila Keene's residence was in close proximity to the supermarket throughout that period. Also, Sheila was chosen from a lineup of pictures by the supermarket employees. Next on the list was the getaway car, a white Chrysler LeBaron. Michael Warren said he didn't know anything about the car when questioned. He said his dealership sold solely Chevrolets, but his chief competitor, Payless, owned a Chrysler LeBaron. There was a history of conflict between Michael and Payless, particularly about an advertisement that Michael's dealership ran that featured the word Payless and was said to be an attempt to mislead customers. Payless once rented out a white Chrysler LeBaron to a client who wasn't local. When it came time to return the vehicle, the customer looked up Payless's number but ultimately got in touch with Michael's dealership. According to the client, they were told to leave the car outside the dealership and put the keys inside the sun visor. But later on, the LeBaron disappeared. The clown's getaway car was left in a grocery store parking lot after the murder. Police found orange synthetic threads in the car that looked like the strands of a clown wig during their search. They also found long brown hairs. When Sheila Keene was murdered, her hair was long and chestnut. During a search warrant, the police discovered more orange synthetic hair strands inside her home. Everything looked like a straightforward matter to handle at this point, but it wasn't. Sheila and Michael angrily denied any involvement in Marlene's death. They denied speaking with police officers without an attorney present. In 1990, DNA testing was still in its infancy, therefore the investigators' only source of evidence was indirect evidence. While Michael's legal troubles grew, the inquiry into Marlene's murder was shelved. Michael's illegal business transactions were discovered during the course of the murder inquiry. Evidence of further odometer tampering and customer overcharging was found by the police. After one of the employees was taken into custody, Michael turned himself in to the authorities. After Michael's case went to trial in 1992, he received a 4-year prison sentence. Michael married Sheila Keene a few years after being freed in 2002. The couple opened a restaurant and made a fresh start in Tennessee. Sheila announced to the community that Debbie was her new name and that it was a nickname from her early years. Given the success of his new restaurant, Michael must be a skilled businessman. Due to their prosperity, the couple was able to move to Heron Point, a wealthy area at the border between Virginia and Tennessee. They got along well with their new neighbors and made many of pals. Few people in the area knew anything about their past. Since he was a teenager, Michael has operated eateries, he said to their new neighborhood. Michael gained from Marlene Warren's death as well. Marlene's son was not the beneficiary of her life insurance policy. It was him. His theft of more than $50,000 from Marlene's family left them with almost nothing. Though they had strong suspicions, detectives lacked hard evidence. Although Sheila and Michael were accused of the crime right away, a grand jury was never called to investigate their claims. Michael's friends had told the police earlier in the investigation that they had witnessed fights between him and Marlene and that Marlene had asked Sheila about her and Michael's extramarital affair. Above all, they said, Michael didn't appear to be very upset by Marlene's death. Because there were so many jigsaw pieces, detectives understood they just needed to fit them together. The key to the case was the DNA. In 1990, Sheila was given blood and hair samples by the police, but they were not equipped to examine them. The materials were stored in a cooler for more than 25 years. In 2013, police were able to revive the cold case of Marlene Warren because of a federal grant they were able to secure. They have attempted DNA testing before, but the results were not definitive. Thankfully, advances in technology have yielded enough proof to prosecute Sheila for Marlene's homicide. 5 minutes from their residence in September 2017, Michael and Sheila were pulled over by the police. They had no idea that the cold case of Marlene Warren had been revived. The police told them that Sheila Keene Warren had an arrest warrant out for her 27 years after the crime. Michael Warren continues to insist that Sheila and he are not involved. In an interview, Michael answered unequivocally that he was not involved in the murder of his first wife. He went on to say that if he had believed Sheila was involved in Marlene's death, he would not have been with her. Before Marlene was killed, a lawyer by the name of Christopher DeSantis told detectives about an interesting conversation he had with Michael Warren. According to DeSantis, Michael asked him what would happen in a hypothetical scenario in which a husband killed his wife. He remembered telling Michael that if the murder was carried out by one of his friends, the husband would not be held accountable since there would be no way to link the husband and the buddy. Interestingly, DeSantis also remembered saying to Michael that if someone dressed like a clown, it would be impossible to identify them and they would get away with it. Nevertheless, there is insufficient evidence for the authorities to charge Michael Warren with killing Marlene, his wife. When his mother passed away, Marlene's son, Joseph Aarons, then a teenager, recalled it as one of the darkest days of his life. In an interview, he stated that he wanted justice, but he would not say whether or not he believed Michael had any role in his mother's passing. Before Sheila's trial could start, she was imprisoned for 5 years. She was still in love with Michael at those times. They corresponded via multiple letters. Sheila Keene was sentenced to 12 years in jail after entering a guilty plea to second-degree murder following her trial. Moving on to the next case. Mildred Matheny. On Saturday, April 27, 1985, Mildred Matheny vanished from sight. Her naked and motionless body was discovered on a dirt road between Jupiter's intersection of 125th Avenue North and Old Indian Town Road. Upon seeing it, someone called the police. On April 7, 1985, 78-year-old Mildred Matheny, an Alzheimer's sufferer, left her home in Lake Worth Beach, Florida, and into the vehicle of an unknown person. Regrettably, her carefree excursion ended with her death. Later that day, 30 miles from her home, she was found on an uneven dirt road, bruised and nude. She died 11 days after being injured. For nearly 40 years, Mildred's murderer and attacker went unidentified, until, in 2023, a breakthrough led to a conviction. Situated in East Central Palm Beach County, Florida, Lake Worth Beach is a quaint city. Its name comes from the Lake Worth Lagoon. With a population of over 42,000, the town is located approximately 64 miles north of lively Miami. East of Palm Springs, north of Lantana, southeast of Lake Clark Shores, and south of West Palm Beach is where you'll find this coastal sanctuary. Situated in the heart of the huge Miami metropolitan area, Lake Worth Beach is a unique center of innovation and culture. Here, experimental music, dance, theater, and vibrant visual arts all thrive. The community is built on the familiarity of neighbors knowing one another by name. Like a place where trust is demonstrated by open doors, the streets are safe. However, even in the middle of this idyllic setting, a tragedy occurred in 1985, leaving a mark on the otherwise peaceful community. Mildred Matheny was born in Wilmar, Arkansas on February 28, 1997. Her early years were influenced by tragedy, even though she was the second of Jess and Margaret Warren's 6 cherished children. When Mildred was 8 years old, her father, who was 37 years old, died of a heart attack. Margaret, a widow, was devastated and had to raise their 6 small children by herself as a result. Mildred began a career that would influence many aspects of her life as she got closer to adulthood. Over the course of her more than 40 years of dedicated labor in the field of psychiatric nursing, her kindness and compassion touched countless lives. In her early years, she wed Guy Harmon Metheny, and the two of them had a wonderful son named Gary. However, life has also been full with heartaches. After Mildred's husband died in 1958, she was left a 51-year-old widow. To make a living, Mildred worked as a psychiatric nurse in a Little Rock mental health facility for almost 40 years with steadfast dedication. Later, after her husband died, Mildred moved from her hometown of Arkansas to Palm Beach County, Florida, where she found comfort in the warm embrace of the city. After Mildred overcame adversity in life, her 75-year-old sister Gladys Nolan offered her a place to live and company. Their home was located in the 1300 block of Crestwood Boulevard in Lake Worth Beach. Boulevard Crestwood, 1300 block. Mildred's journey had been marked by a life of service. As her brother's mental state worsened, she not only looked after him but also faced her own health issues as she approached 70. Because of her condition, she began a new chapter in her life at her sister's house. She was drawn to Florida's breathtaking coasts, and her son and grandkids gave her the confidence to take the risky decision to relocate. However, there were some difficulties with the adjustment. The shift put her in unfamiliar territory, and dementia affected her judgment. She was terrified to leave the house without a trustworthy friend. She was eager and full of anticipation for a visit from her beloved grandchildren when she and Gladys moved into their new Florida home. At about 4:30 p.m. on April 27, 1985, Mildred Metheny, a dementia patient, vanished from her peaceful community at her Florida home. Witnesses reported seeing her at around 3:30 p.m., completely oblivious of the approaching disaster, as she left her home while still wearing a shirt over pajamas. After an agonizing hour, the alarm went off and she was placed under formal missing persons report. About 20 miles from her last known location, on a secluded dirt road, a passerby discovered her unconscious, nude, and injured 7 hours after she went missing. The moment the bystander reported his discovery to the authorities, an investigation was launched. The dirt road was now tainted with blood from Mildred's trauma, her garments left behind, and her bloody dentures. Her clothes were scattered around, and her blood-stained dentures were found on the road. They transported her to Juniper Medical Center due to a significant head injury, and a brain surgeon evaluated her there. The woman's face and head were heavily bleeding, giving the impression that she had been hit fairly severely. Although no one witnessed her abduction, her neighbors stated that at approximately 3:30 p.m., they spotted her strolling down the street while still wearing her pajamas. 11 days later, due to the heavy blow to her head, among other mild ailments, Mildred passed away. People were heartbroken by the fact that she had been attacked so violently. Hospital personnel conducted the assault test because the way she had been injured was so horrific. For the detectives to piece together, everything came together. They took samples from the location of the incident that included DNA from both the assailants and Mildred Metheny. But since there were no hits at the time owing to antiquated technology, the lawsuit was dropped. Nobody knew who had killed and harmed Mildred for nearly 40 years. The only evidence the police had was some DNA left behind by the attacker, but it was too ancient for scientists to identify the source. For years, the authorities maintained that the Cold Case Homicide Squad had been instrumental in resolving this case. Cold case investigations are the primary emphasis of this detective unit. The assault evidence was linked to the offender through the application of advanced and innovative DNA analysis techniques. After a scientist reviewed the evidence from the Palm Beach County Police Station where this incident occurred, Mildred's foreign DNA was identified in 2021. Using this DNA, they created a profile which they subsequently entered into the Florida State Combined DNA Index. Richard Curtis Lang was quickly linked to DNA found in the attack kit. Records show that he was 25 years old when he injured Mildred. To be certain, though, investigators required a direct sample of his DNA. Richard Curtis Lang's saliva had to be obtained in order to verify that it matched the foreign DNA discovered on the victim. To accomplish this, they have a warrant or other legal authorization. On April 22, 2021, detectives went to Richard Lang's home in Boynton Beach, Florida, and collected a sample of his DNA. Records show that in 2006-212, Richard Lang, who is today 62 years old, got into major difficulties which forced him to give his DNA. His DNA was added to the database in this manner. After all these years, the killer of Mildred Metheny has finally been identified thanks to clever detective work and cutting-edge technology. Richard Lang's past legal troubles are documented in both state and county records. In both 1983 and 1993, he was convicted guilty of aggravated assault. However, he was given a probationary sentence rather than a prison sentence. He didn't stop there, though. In the year 2012, on June 6th, his weapons were found. Despite the seriousness of these actions, he did not serve a lengthy sentence in prison. He was given short sentences, therefore he did not spend a lot of time inside bars. In April 2021, Richard Curtis Lang was taken into custody and charged with Mildred Metheny's murder. The study began in the first part of 2023. Additionally, Richard Lang was accused of killing and assaulting Mildred Metheny. A tiny bit of genetic material centered a landmark trial in a West Palm Beach courtroom. Mildred's assault kit sperm was directly related to Richard Lang. During the trial, the scientist who found the match gave testimony in court. The probability that the DNA they discovered came from Lang was 27 quadrillion times higher than that of it originating from someone else, even though they were unable to confirm that it did. Attorney Scott Skier for Richard Lang contended that the DNA might have possibly originated from Lang's close male cousins. However, after identifying Richard Lang as a suspect, detectives did not perform any DNA matching on any of them. Joe Walensky and Krishay Mixon, assistant state attorneys, refuted this claim by reminding the jury that no other family members were in Florida in 1985. They described it as hypothetical. Richard Lang moved to Florida in his 20s to work as a plumber after leaving Massachusetts. At the age of 25, he viciously assaulted Mildred Metheny. So it was obvious that Richard Lang was the real culprit. Judge Delia Weiss of the Circuit Court sentenced Richard Curtis Lang to life in prison for the most serious allegation of first-degree murder. Lang, 63, was declared guilty. After Lang was found guilty, his family informed the judge that they would file an appeal. His attorney read the letter out loud in court. They thought the conviction contradicted everything they knew about Richard Lang. They asserted that the man appearing in court was not the same person they knew and that the accusations made against him were not consistent with his true nature. The letter offered a different perspective on the guy who was convicted in 1985 of seriously hurting Mildred Metheny, a 78-year-old woman who was loved as a son, father, brother, and uncle. Richard Lang led a decent life that was based on his Catholic faith. The great-niece of Mildred Metheny reminded the judge in a letter of the intense suffering and anguish Mildred had gone through before her passing. One of the lawyers, Mixon, read aloud a letter that had been written by Metheny's great-niece. It contradicted Richard Lang's pleading for forgiveness. Mixon begged the justices to keep Mildred Metheny's suffering and dread in mind. Judge Wise agreed that Mildred died in a horrible and violent way. Mixon requested a second life term for battery in addition to the earlier life sentence for killing. Scott Skier asked for 9 years, but Judge Wise granted 15. Richard Curtis Lang was sentenced to life in prison following the death of Mildred Metheny. He is currently serving the remainder of his life in prison. Closing a case may seem easy when you are familiar with all of the details, characters, and occurrences. The emotional cost and intricacy of such a voyage, however, cannot be overstated. Gary Metheny had been impatiently waiting for a call like the one he finally received for over 36 years. Finally, he learned that someone had been held responsible for his ailing mother's horrible demise. He said, "I'd given up hope," to convey how he felt. Years of unpredictable experiences had passed for him. He was overjoyed to learn about the arrest at the age of 88. What do you think about this case? Please use the comment area to share your thoughts with us. Moving on to the next case. Paula Illyra. Paula Illyra, then 13 years old, came home from school in East Harlem, New York on January 24, 1991, around 4:45 p.m. She went into her apartment building's elevator and headed to the 30th floor, where her family resided after receiving her mother's buzzer. But during this brief trip, Paula vanished out of nowhere. A man walking his dog found Paula's lifeless body half a mile from her home 3 hours later, at 7:30 p.m. Unsettling doubts regarding Paula's disappearance and death, as well as what had happened to her, plagued the neighborhood after this tragic tragedy. Paula and her family were an essential part of the El Barrio, or East Harlem neighborhood, which is located in the center of Manhattan, New York City. This neighborhood, rich in culture, is well known for its wide range of customs, artwork, and strong feeling of community. With its colorful street murals, restaurants, and festivals, East Harlem gladly embraces its Hispanic and Latino history. The prestigious Museum of the City of New York, which highlights the rich history of the city, is also located in this neighborhood. The background of our story is placed against the roughly 1 in 22 chance of becoming a victim of crime in East Harlem, according to statistics. In the latter part of the 1970s, Viola Illyra was born in Colombia to parents Cesar and Olga Illyra. The two elder siblings she had were Julio and Alexandra. Paula relocated to East Harlem, New York City in June 1990 with her mother and brothers in pursuit of a better life. They shared an apartment with Paula's uncle Guillermo Ospina at 420 East 111th Street, where they lived on the 30th floor. Her father, Cesar, continued to work as a taxi driver in Colombia in the meanwhile, gathering money to eventually go to New York to be with his family. As soon as they got to New York, Paula started junior high school. Paula excelled academically and devoted her free time to studying English and mathematics, according to her sister Alexandra. She had very few friends, most of them were her classmates, and she wanted to be a lawyer so that she could help people. Uncle Guillermo thought she was far too smart and adult for her years, with maturity and intelligence beyond her years. He also noted that Paola's love of the English language brought her a lot of happiness in New York. Her uncle Guillermo claimed that she was a young child with many aspirations for the future. Paola's family appeared to be moving along nicely until a tragic event drastically changed their path. Paula, only 13 years old, left her school on a cold January 24, 1991 afternoon and returned to her apartment building's comfortable confines. She reached the building's door at about 4:45 p.m. and used the intercom to get in touch with her apartment. Olga, her mother, answered and let her in by pushing the button to open the lobby door. Olga had no idea that her final conversation with her cherished daughter would take place during this routine exchange. Paula opened the door, went into the lobby, and got into the elevator. Sadly, though, she never made it to their flat on the 31st floor. Paula didn't get home for 10 minutes, and her brother and uncle started to worry. They decided to look for her since they felt that something was off. They raced downstairs to the lobby and found it entirely empty. They searched the neighborhood furiously for Paula, but she seemed to have disappeared. A man walking his dog 3 hours later at around 7:30 p.m. discovered a startling find. He discovered a body on the sidewalk close to the East River. Used lighters, vials, and other drug-related items were scattered all over the place. Sadly, Paula's thin corpse was still motionless and she had already passed away. The place where her body was found was about 0.5 miles south of the apartment complex where she lived. Detectives were met with an incredibly depressing scenario when they arrived at the scene. There were no leads available to identify the criminal. Paula's body was found to contain only a piece of chalk and a new kid's block watch. Paula's family and the area as a whole were greatly affected by her murder. Olga, her mother, was inconsolable and found it difficult to accept her daughter's passing. The tragedy stunned Paula's school students and faculty. Following the incident, educators met with children to provide support and grief-stricken assistance to Paula's family members. For their own protection, they advised students not to stroll around the area by themselves. Reporters were not allowed inside the school, and neither the principal nor district representatives would talk to them. There were a lot of unsolved questions for the detectives. In an attempt to locate witnesses who may have seen Paula in the area where her body was found, they searched the 30-story building. Sadly, nobody had reported seeing her there. Furthermore, the investigators lacked a description of the perpetrator. Paula's body was discovered stuffed with crack vials, although it was unclear if she was slain there or somewhere else. Important information was discovered by the detectives during their investigation. They discovered that Paula frequently stayed after school on Wednesdays and Thursdays to attend a journalistic program. She was working on a Valentine's Day gift story about her father the day she was murdered. Additionally, the investigators learned that Paula and a friend left the school following the workshop at 4 p.m. and headed north on First Avenue. At 106th Street, they split off, Paula going in the direction of her family's apartment complex. Aram Warford, another youngster, was found to have used the same elevator as Paula by the detectives after they obtained information throughout their inquiry. But when they spoke with him, he said that Paula had continued her climb while he had left on the 19th floor. As a result, the detectives shifted their attention from him to another possible suspect. The autopsy revealed a horrifying picture of Paula's level of pain. She suffered 3 stab wounds close to her heart as well as being molested and strangled. On her thighs, the medical examiner also noticed strange, elongated markings. It was clear that Paula had fought back against her assailant, who had twisted her legs so that the bruises resembled fingers. The male hair that was removed from her body and saved as evidence was also collected by the examiner. St. on February 2, 1991, where Paula was buried. Queens's East Elmhurst is home to Michael Cemetery. 4 months following Paula's terrible death, her family decided to move to Flushing, New York, where they were helped by Victim Services, a private nonprofit that assists victims and their families of violent crimes. The oldest victim in Flushing sought comfort from Victim Services through therapy at the Families of Homicide Victims program. The family held on to the dream that Paula would receive justice while they dealt with life's challenges and recovered. But as time went on, the case progressively grew colder and the search for solutions grew more difficult. In any place at any time, the murder of a 13-year-old girl ought to have attracted a lot of media attention. Unfortunately, this horrible crime in East Harlem remained mostly unreported during the violent outbreak that rocked New York in 1991. Over 2,000 murders were reported in the city between 1990 and 1992, and an average of 6 bodies were found every day throughout New York City's 5 boroughs. Regretfully, most of these occurrences happened in disadvantaged neighborhoods where minorities predominate, like East Harlem, the South Bronx, and East New York, Brooklyn. Sadly, the media paid little attention to more than a handful of these situations. Rather, the media preferred to concentrate on more upscale crimes with white, rich victims in beautiful environments. Paula's case was deemed a low-priority homicide because of the absence of political pressure and media coverage. As a result, her murder remained unsolved and was virtually forgotten throughout the majority of the 1990s. Midway through the 1990s, New York City's crime rate started to decline, but there remained a concerning tendency in the East Harlem housing developments. Regardless of the teen's race, a string of seemingly unconnected events surfaced, all of which involved the assault and killing of young, attractive youths. A 15-year-old girl was attacked with a knife in 1994. This episode exposed a pattern of behavior that the offender used again throughout the course of the following 4 years. He would come up behind the adolescent, take her to a private area, blindfold her with a rag from her own clothes, have her take off her clothes, and then beat her. Remarkably, the 15-year-old survivor was able to describe her attacker. He was a well-groomed young man with a robust build and an exaggerated feeling of his own value. It's shocking to say that he even told the victim how fortunate she was to be attacked by someone as attractive as him. Firefighters were alerted to a rooftop fire at the George Washington residences on East 104th Street a few years later, on September 10, 1997. After looking into it, they discovered a woman who had been badly beaten, hit with a blunt weapon, and charred beyond recognition. Jogelis Castro, a 19-year-old who had moved to New York from the Dominican Republic with her family, was eventually confirmed as the victim. Johalis, a young mother of a daughter, had been attending a small college in the Bronx to further her computer science education. In the same neighborhood, a 13-year-old girl became the third victim 7 months later, in April 1998. Thankfully, the little victim managed to flee without harm. 2 months subsequently, on June 2, 1998, 17-year-old Rashida Washington tragically passed away. She had been robbed, attacked, and strangled when she was found in a 15th-floor staircase of an East 100 and 12th Street apartment project. What had happened was not immediately apparent when Rashida's body was discovered. Her shirtless, lifeless body was leaning against the wall in a sitting position. Rashida was a fashion student who worked at a clothes boutique. She was small, just weighing 100 pounds, much like the victims before her. Regretfully, she was killed 3 days after turning 18. 2 other young teenagers were assaulted in the same region during the fall of that same year. On September 25, 1998, a 15-year-old was attacked, and on November 16th, a 14-year-old. Fortunately, these 2 teenagers made it out alive, probably because the attacker was blindfolded before they had a chance to get a close look. The authorities did not openly admit the likelihood that a serial killer in East Harlem was targeting teenage females, even if there were still similar occurrences. But in the end, the police chose to act right away because of the worries expressed by the victims' parents. A comparatively modest database of DNA samples was available in the early 1990s since widespread testing of convicted felons had not yet started. But in the fall of 1998, there was a major development in the East Harlem cases. Experts in forensics from the New York police examined body fluid evidence from the murder of Rash Washington, and 2 other cases that were comparable to it in the area. These tests unequivocally connected the 3 incidents to the same offender. At last, investigators possessed tangible proof verifying the presence of a prolific offender preying on adolescents in Harlem. In response, the police hierarchy established a detective-led task group with the express purpose of apprehending the suspect. They responded by distributing the wanted poster, which included a drawing of the serial killer based on the victims' descriptions. After the leaflet was distributed in East Harlem, Addister recommended that the detectives concentrate their search on a 25-year-old man named Ace, who lived on the 19th floor of the same building where Paula had previously resided. The police soon learned that Ace's real name was Aaron Key, which brought them memories of Aaron from Paula's murder case. Arone Warford, a teenage boy who had been observed getting into the elevator with Paula and claiming to have left on the 19th level, was brought to the detectives' attention. Arone, an unusual first name, also surfaced during the 1997 murder inquiry of Jojalise Castro. Phone records showed that in the days preceding her death, Jojalise had made multiple calls to a man by the name of Aaron Key. When questioned, Aaron said that Jojalise was a friend of his girlfriend Jacqueline's, and on the day of her murder, they were organizing a shopping excursion. Jacqueline, who spoke with the police, affirmed Aaron's account. Later on, it was found that Aaron Key and Arone Warford were the same individual, with Key being his mother's last name and Warford being his father's. Given that Arone was the last person seen with Paula before her death and that he had extensive phone connection with Jojalise before her murder, this revelation connected him to 2 of the 3 victims in the suspected serial killer case. These ties sparked questions, so investigators looked into Arone's past more thoroughly. He was described as a reasonably spoken and intellectual man. He was born on September 18, 1973, and grew up mostly in East Harlem. Paulo lived in the same building as his relatives in 1991 when he vanished. Arone has a reputation for being charming and having computer skills. He claimed to be involved in the production of rap music, but there wasn't much proof to back up this claim. He was physically attractive, standing 5 feet 8 inches tall with a dapper appearance. His criminal history included just 1 theft charge in 1990 and little to no jail or prison time. On the other hand, neighbors thought differently about Arone. He was noted as having a troublesome side, constantly carrying a portable video camera to record inappropriate footage, and frequently looking through the women's skirt folds in the building. Even though the police didn't have any solid evidence against Arone at this point, they still felt that a thorough investigation was necessary. Their attention turned to the attacker from September 1998, who had left a gray sweater and a black cap behind. The detectives made the decision to thoroughly inspect these articles of clothes in search of leads. Their efforts were rewarded when they found a laundry tag on one of the clothes that directed them to a dry cleaner close to Arone's house. The fact that Aron's mother Cynthia was identified as a client at this dry cleaner added even more significance to this discovery. Law enforcement was more and more certain that a DNA test would prove Aron's guilt for the crimes, since all the evidence seemed to lead to him as the main suspect. But there was a big impediment in their path. Since DNA testing was not required for alleged offenders in New York until 2000, Aron did not have a record. Getting a DNA sample in the 90s wasn't as easy as asking for a swab and hauling in a suspect. DNA tests were regarded as intrusive procedures, and obtaining a sample required a judge's approval based on a reasonable suspicion. Even with strong circumstantial evidence linking Aaron to the incident, specifics like the laundry tag, phone conversations, and elevator ride weren't enough to persuade a judge to request a DNA sample. Consequently, the authorities were forced to devise a backup plan. At first, they tried to follow Aaron in the hopes that he would spit or throw away some chewing gum and accidentally leave behind a saliva sample. Nevertheless, this tactic didn't work. On February 8, 1999, when Aaron was taken into custody for taking a computer hard disk, detectives made their big break. At the time, there were no regulations in New York requiring DNA testing of those who had been arrested, so the police used some deceit to get a sample. Under the pretext of conducting a standard osteoporosis test, a female investigator who was dressed as a doctor approached Aron and requested a sample of his saliva. When Aaron saw a paragraph that mentioned DNA analysis, he cautiously declined to cooperate even though he was given documentation to sign. He used his Jehovah's Witness faith as justification for not being able to receive medical care. He tore apart his paper cup, flushed the fragments down the toilet, and then switched cups with his cellmate to further perplex investigators. But the cops were ready. They'd already taken action to gather the relevant evidence. Aram was placed in a common holding cell with 5 other males shortly after his detention. The personnel gave them mugs of water to drink while they were there. These cups were found by the investigators in a waste paper basket, and they were then sent for DNA analysis. The results, which were obtained in a matter of days, verified that the DNA of the East Harlem criminal and a sample taken from the rim of one of the cups discovered in the police holding cell matched. As Aron was merely charged with a misdemeanor for computer theft, he was already free on bond by the time the results of the DNA test were available on February 12, 1999. In the meantime, the $11,000 reward given by the New York Police Department was for any information that would result in his apprehension. Soon after, the police learned that Aaron had gone to Brownsville, Brooklyn, and met up with Angelique Stallings, his 16-year-old lover. Her folks thought they were heading out on a Valentine's Day date. But rather than following through on their intentions, Aaron and Angelique left Newark, New Jersey, and boarded a bus bound for Florida. The possibility that Angelique was in danger or may suffer the same fate as the earlier victims worried the detectives. Aron called his other girlfriend in New York twice after getting to South Florida. By now, headlines had been created about this supposed serial killer on the run. When the second girlfriend realized what was going on, she quickly called the police and told them that Aron was staying at the Miami Sun Hotel, which is situated on Northeast 1st Avenue in downtown Miami, about 2 blocks from the ocean. 2 investigators from New York hurried to the hotel after receiving this tip and started monitoring it. They summoned the Miami-Dade SWAT squad for help when they saw Aron and Angelique wandering about inside. On February 19, 1999, the SWAT squad attacked the building and found Aron and Angelique cowering under the bed on the 6th level of the hotel. Aron was taken into custody after being captured. Aron opted to keep quiet and withhold any information when detectives attempted to question him about the East Harlem crimes. But the police came up with a plan. Later, they led Angelique to enter the interrogation room as they observed and listened behind a 2-way mirror. Aroni and Angelique assumed they were saying goodbye in private. Angelique pressed Aroni to explain why he had committed the atrocities during their talk. Aron gave a perplexing response. He claimed to have been ill and said that he had bugged out. Arone was eventually extradited to New York to face trial on 22 felony charges related to 4 assaults and the deaths of Paula Hilera, Yojalis Castro, and Rashida Washington, after a protracted 4-month court battle. 6 of the 7 instances had a Aron connection according to DNA evidence. Prosecutors John Irwin and Richard Plansky presented an impressive case against Aaron during the fall 2000 trial, utilizing a plethora of witnesses and DNA evidence. 2 of Aaron's victims were among the 130 prosecution witnesses that they called. Aaron insisted on testifying as the first defense witness. Aaron showed a range of emotions over his 2 days of evidence, from laughing like a schoolgirl to crying like a baby. He expressed his annoyance at being charged as well. He covered a wide range of topics throughout his soliloquy, which was mostly unhindered by the judge, prosecutors, or his own attorneys. These included pop culture, narcotics, rap music, jail food, and his thoughts on the criminal justice system. In front of a courtroom full of his victims' relatives, Aaron conjured up a bizarre story to explain why he was being accused of brutal serial abuse of young ladies. He stated that a dishonest medical examiner involved in the illegal trafficking of human organs had teamed up with the police to frame him as part of a cover-up. He even claimed that there had been genetic shuffling, or tampering with his DNA. His elaborate story did not, however, sway the jurors. The courtroom erupted in cheers on December 16, 2000, the day the guilty decision was announced. Aroni swore profanely at the distraught relatives as he was led past them. 1 month later, in January 2001, Aram's victims' families were given the chance to speak with him face-to-face during the sentencing. As she thought about her daughter's suffering at the moment of her death, Paula's mother, Olga, spoke to him, hoping that he would understand the agony of restless nights, appetite loss, immobility, and lack of calm. Having taken her daughter to the United States in search of the American ideal, Olga described her ongoing suffering. During his turn to speak at the sentencing hearing, Aaron sobbed and expressed regret. Johalis Castro's male cousin exploded with rage in response, trying to jump over the barrier and throw himself at Aaron. After this, the punishment was given by Justice Jones Soldanik. She gave Aaron 3 life sentences for the 3 murders, with no chance of release. He was also given a 400-year sentence on 4 charges of abuse. Orome was a prisoner at Dannemora, New York's Clinton Correctional Facility. By the time Orome received his sentence, laws requiring DNA testing of anyone accused in connection with violent crimes had been passed in New York and many other states. Since then, the majority of felony arrests, both violent and nonviolent, have been included in this testing. In addition, several jurisdictions have started testing suspects' DNA for misdemeanors. Olga's pain of losing Paula is still very much present. She is well aware that the pain caused by the unexpected and senseless death of a loved one does not go away, especially in cases where there are still a lot of unresolved questions. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.